Hey, this is Chadillac, and welcome to the Cage Rage podcast. CRP presents the undercard wrap-up for 143. Did I get that right, guys? Is it 143? Yeah, Fight Night 143. There's so many of them, it's hard to keep up anymore. Is it Fight Night? Is it pay-per-view? Is it ESPN Plus? Is it Dana's show? What is it? There's a lot going on right now. MMA is expanding all the time, and that's a great thing. It's particularly great for the Cage Rage podcast. So don't forget to smash that button and subscribe below. Hey, I'm here with archivist and fight genius matchmaker Miguel Iturrate. And also I'm here with our on-the-road correspondent, fight analyst, Devin Miller. We are talking MMA, and we are talking about the undercard fights for 143, the first endeavor between ESPN and the UFC officially on ESPN streaming +1. Went pretty well. Some of the initial undercard fights didn't come through for me for some reason. So they've got a couple of bugs to work out, but that's just part of streaming. It's not part of anything they did. It has to do with where you live. I'm sure they'll get that worked out as they go. Devin, take it away. What you got, brother?
Well, the card opened up with a fight between Chase Ringcounter and Kyle Stewart. Ringcounter got the win. He's now 1-1 in the UFC. Got a rear naked choke in the second round. The second fight of the night was a fight between Jeff Neal and Bilal Muhammad at welterweight, which was a pretty solid fight. Neal's now 3-0 in the UFC. I'm very high on Neal. I think he's going to be a top 15, maybe top 10 contender at welterweight. He won his third. He's now 3-0 in the UFC with 2 finishes. Began on the Dana White Contender Series where he got a finish, and now has won 3 in the UFC. Tough 170, big 170. Then from there, Dennis Bermudez scored a decision over T. Edwards in his swan song fight. He hung up the gloves after the fight after a pretty solid career that began on The Ultimate Fighter a few years ago. After that, there was a fight between Corey Sanhagen and Mario Batista. Sanhagen, I believe, is 3-0 now in the UFC. Solid bantamweight, man. I mean, he's exciting to watch. I think that he could be a legit contender at that division. I would recommend people go back and watch these fights and watch, especially. Keep an eye on him and Jeff Neal. My other top contender that came from the undercard that I was pretty high on was Alonzo Menifield, who I believe also began on the Dana White Contender Series. He did. This was his first fight in the UFC. He gets a first-round stoppage. He's a powerhouse at light heavyweight. I think he's a solid guy who has a pretty good future, especially in a pretty thin weight class like heavyweight, light heavyweight. And then right before the Cerrone fight, which was kind of like the main event of the undercard, Joanne Calderwood won another fight. And she's kind of like Jessica Ai, who has moved up from 115 to 125 when they opened up that division. She's got a few wins. She looks like she's a lot better at flyweight than what she was down at bantamweight, strawweight, where she was making a very extreme cut down to that weight class. She seems solid. She's always had really good Muay Thai. She's a solid grappler. I think Calderwood might be a top 10 contender right now at flyweight, even though there's such a huge gap between and the rest of the division right now. I think that she's pretty solid, and that weight class is definitely there's a lot to be shuffled around there. I think we might see Calderwood versus Van Sant next, possibly. And with that, I'm going to send it off to Miguel to open us up about what we're going to talk about mainly on this episode, which was the Donald Cerrone Alexander Hernandez fight, where Cerrone extended his win record in the UFC to 22 wins now in the octagon, and setting up a potential fight with Conor McGregor.
Hey, and I want to remind everybody that was our dog fight. We picked Cerrone on that dog fight, so if you would have followed us, you'd be richer today. Miguel, what's happening, man?
Good stuff for Cerrone. You know, I mean, the thing about Cerrone is he's a veteran, and when you got a veteran who's a lot of fights, when there's a lot of fights like that, then you start to see where is his wear and tear, because he's showing some wear and tear too, so he's not quite the same impressive guy. So he went into this fight actually on the undercard, and he's probably maybe the biggest name on the card, right? So You kind of wondered what was going on with Cerrone, where he was. I liked the way he entered this fight because it was a hype thing with Hernandez. He didn't have a lot of fights. He didn't have a lot of fights in the UFC. I like confident fighters, right? But there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and I think when you're facing a guy like Cerrone, a little step back on the confidence would have been good for Hernandez. The whole karma thing just didn't look good heading in because Cerrone was did exactly what he always, he showed up. I remember there was a press conference, I think it may have been the weigh-ins. He had his leather jacket on, and he sat there, and he was as quiet, mild-mannered, like another day at the office. And, that's all that stuff says a lot. So Cerrone got the job done, and what it does is, it got the attention of McGregor, and McGregor at this point is the cash cow there. So we always knew, I think, Cerrone's on a short list of guys. McGregor, the thing with McGregor to me is McGregor's not going to ever fight a guy like Hernandez. They're not going to have McGregor versus Mickey Gall or something like that just to get McGregor a fight. The guy who fights McGregor has to also be a star. He has to bring enough to the table that McGregor's paycheck also goes up and McGregor feels, or else why do it? Cerrone, especially after a nice win like this, is one of those guys.
Okay, so Miguel, talk about what did McGregor say? Okay, first of all, Cerrone hit McGregor up with something on Twitter. So talk to me about that. I know you don't tweet yourself, but talk to me about the basics on what the scruff was, what they were talking about, and kind of how that brouhaha took place.
With the UFC, I always wonder, maybe they want this fight already, and maybe they've got it already planned, and what you're starting to see is the beginning of the way their machine works, Yeah. Maybe it's both fighters calling each other out, and that's cool, too. It's a no-brainer for Cerrone to call out McGregor because Cerrone's doing pretty good, I've seen good videos of he's got a nice farm, he's got a nice property out in the mountains in Colorado, and he trains on his property in a state-of-the-art gym, and, he likes his toys. He's got four-wheel. He's not poor.
He's got a place in New Mexico. He's doing really well.
Yeah, maybe it's New Mexico, not Colorado.
But no, both. Both.
I mean, the thing
both.
He's worked good. And, he's worked hard. He deserves everything he has.
Damn right.
But that's part of bringing what you bring to the table. He's already an established guy. He's got a couple of properties and lives well and is an established star already. Ergo, he can get McGregor's attention. And that's really what's important here, is McGregor needs a dance partner. And Cerrone, I think, is going to fit the bill in more than one respect. I think, especially in this performance where Hernandez basically got outstruck, right? I mean, Cerrone put the pressure on him in the stand-up and just ground him out and stuff like that. He ain't going to do that to McGregor. At this point, you kind of got to give McGregor enough credit. McGregor's got to see a stand-up fight and always think he's got a chance, right?
Yeah.
So I think he becomes a guy that, I don't know, maybe we're looking at Cerrone as an underdog. If 2 fights in a row, is he going to be an underdog against McGregor? Probably. But, McGregor, I think, thinks he can outstrike Cerrone, and I think that makes him a plausible opponent. They go back and forth. It gets Dana's attention. Unless Dana's got a better idea, I don't know what it is, This is a good idea unless you're going to do the McGregor, Magomedov or something like that. I still like the idea of treating McGregor like every other fighter and taking him off a loss, putting him in against Ferguson and forcing him to fight a number 1 contender fight while Nurmagomedov sits out the rest of his suspension, right? That's what I would do. But Cerrone becomes a better plan monetary-wise, so I think they'll go that way.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and Devin, maybe you can chime in on this as well, because you and I have both pretty much agreed on this right down the line, and now this throws a real hitch in our giddy-up. I thought almost assuredly that the fight was going to be the rubber match with Diaz and McGregor, almost no matter what happened, that would be McGregor's next fight. That seems like his money match. Is the problem that Diaz has run out of time? Is he not enough of a star? Is he too thug? Is it that he knows he can beat McGregor and McGregor knows he can beat McGregor? what throw me something here. Give me a bone. Why are we talking about Cerrone now instead of Diaz again?
Let me cover that real quick, Chad. I think I think the thing is they know that they have the Diaz match in their back pocket. Yeah. That fight will happen eventually. They want to get as much as they can get out of Conor McGregor's star power while they can get it. And it is a very smart move now. While Cerrone's high, I mean, Cerrone has become maybe the most loved fighter in the entire sport. This was his 40th fight under Zuffa when you count the WEC fights. Wow. This has been the most active fighter over the past decade, bar none. He's a fighter's fighter. Everybody loves him. He's the winningest fighter in the UFC history, and he's on a good run, and he's cut down to 55. And a fight with him stylistically is perfect for McGregor right now because McGregor will be the favorite in that fight. It's the type of fight that McGregor really likes. Cerrone has had issues in the past with head movement, and he's also had issues with the body. That's why Nate Diaz was able to land like 300-some shots on him when they fought. Nate Diaz just boxed his ears off. And Cerrone, who is a great, great fighter, I hate to say this about him, but he still kind of is in that gatekeeper role. But that's coming back to bite them. But it's all it's done is really make Cerrone a bigger star than he's ever been. And when it comes to somebody like Hernandez, they tried the same thing with Mike Perry. Cerrone shut that down. They tried it with Hernandez, and now he shut that down, where he's knocking off these young contenders. So why not throw him in there with McGregor right now? And I think that's a good fight, and I think that they know they can still. Especially if Conor wins, it gets Conor back in the win column. They can bring that. They can even throw him in there with Khabib again. And even if he loses a second fight to Khabib, they can still market that trilogy fight with Diaz. Yeah. That fight's not going anywhere. There's no.
Okay.
I thought they were gonna bring it out because they want the money fight, but I think they're gonna realize that they have that. Regardless, the worst thing that could happen to Conor's stock is if he fights Cerrone and loses. That's going to really hurt.
Miguel, what do you think of that?
Possible.
Okay, Miguel, let me ask you this: Conor,
let me take it a step further.
Huh?
Well, just one thing. Let me take it a step further. I want to caution. Now, first of all, obviously Nate and Nick are different people, and but they're very close. And I think the UFC kind of takes him as the bottom line is Nate's actually a little easier to deal with than Nick, I think, or in the overall package. I think we've seen that, in 15 years of history. But I think both of them are also in a situation where the UFC is going to be ready to move on and operate without them. And I'm talking about all the McGregor fights left on the 7, I think he's got 7 fights left on his contract, right? So I think they're ready to move, I think it was a really bad sign that there was, talk all over the place, and that Diaz was set to fight Masvidal, and that fight falls by the wayside. Then you don't hear what's going on and things like that. And again, I know it was not the same kid, and Nate has actually fought with the UFC or for them while Nick was at odds with them and stuff like that. So I know they're different people, but I think overall the UFC is ready to move on from the Diaz thing. Keep in mind, these fighters have short careers, and these kids are not kids anymore, but they've eaten up a lot of time on the sideline, thinking they're negotiating, thinking they're doing that. And, to me, a lot of the times when you sit out for a big fight 2 years, I don't know if Cerrone took a different route, right? Cerrone, we're talking about Cerrone, and I love, the video of him on his four-wheelers and on his property and doing, all that. Cerrone did pretty good fighting 4 or 5 times a year, didn't he? So it's hard to say when you bank so many years on the sidelines, and literally it's been years at this point on the sidelines, whether you've done yourself more harm than good. And I think that's something that you worry about with the Diaz brothers.
Yeah, I see exactly where you're coming from. I see what you're driving at. And, man, you can never underestimate the power of ring rust either. It could easily be argued that Conor, a big part of the reason that Conor got dominated so easily in round 1 from the Gormadov was simply because of ring rust. He hadn't been there in a while, and he got bull rushed, and he just didn't know what to do, and he kind of looked out of place. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I just think he got beat up. But you could make that argument, of course. So ring rust is, it's always out there because it's like age. It's that old nemesis that, time. It's the factor that catches all of us. So, so Devin, what do you think then? Where do we go from here? Okay, first of all, guys, let me ask both of you this. You're the experts. Does the fight have a real chance of happening in the next 6 months? First of all, answer that.
Yeah. I think it's going to happen. I think that they know they got to make it happen.
When?
I think late spring, early summer. I think that is a good fight for Conor McGregor. I think he knows it. I think he knows that. I think, and here's the big curveball. I don't know if it's going to be on ES. I don't know if it's going to be on pay-per-view.
Yeah.
I could see them paying ESPN and the UFC paying McGregor solid money to do a card either on ESPN Network or what would probably be more likely on the ESPN Plus app, because can you imagine the amount of subscriptions that they would get for a Donald Cerrone, Conor McGregor headline? And that would almost be better for them in this new deal at the moment than doing it on pay-per-view, even though they would get great pay-per-view buys no matter what. But I think they're going to be supremely confident that Conor McGregor wins this fight, and I think it's going to be a very fun fight to watch because Cerrone will hang in there even if he does end up getting knocked out. But it'll be a very fun fight. It'll be the perfect fight to get Conor McGregor back and his attention back. You've got, like I said, probably the most beloved fighter in the UFC right now, going against their most popular star, who people have a love-hate relationship with. I think it's a good fight. The one thing I will say about Miguel's point about the Diaz brothers is, and I think he's correct, that they understand the realization that a fighter it has a stock value like any other stock.
Yep. And
they wanted to play to that, to where they didn't want to take too many losses. I mean, you had Nate Diaz, who had losses to Josh Thompson. You had losses to Rafael Dos Anjos. You had Nick, who went in there and fought Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, Carlos Condit, had a 3-fight losing streak. And they know that they're very popular names, even with their losses, because their wins and their good fights have been so entertaining, and they're such characters that people love them even through their losses. And I think that they just tried to negotiate the best terms, the best payday for their fights when they do fight, and keep their stock value high and get the best fights they can for the most amount of money. But like Miguel said, it's kind of come back to bite them, because Cerrone was kind of the same way, who had an up and down career and took some losses. I mean, he got ran through by RDH twice, and Nate Diaz boxed his ears off, and he's took some L's. Leon Edwards beat him. I mean, he's lost some fights, but he's just kept fighting. Yeah. And because of that, like I said, he's like the fighter's fighter now. And people remember his great performances and remember how active and entertaining he has been. And he's 30-some years old now, pushing the ladder by definitely the tail end of his career, and his stock has never been higher. And now he's probably about to get this huge payday for a fight against Conor McGregor, which will be the biggest of his career. If he wins it, he might end up with another title fight before his career is over. So, and I think there's a lot of favorable matchups with them. I could see Cerrone handling himself well with Conor. I could see him handling himself well with Dustin Poirier, with Justin Gaethje, maybe even Tony Ferguson.
Yeah.
So I think that. I think that all of those are fun fights for me. We might even see Donald Cerrone versus Max Holloway.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about the Blast, man?
There's so many potential matchups for him right now. But I definitely think we're going to see, and unless they absolutely need a pay-per-view headliner, I think we'll see Cerrone and Conor probably on ESPN Plus within the late spring, early summer.
Miguel, what do you think?
I think you got two potential dates here. I think it's a Vegas fight. I mean, if they want to maybe go and do McGregor's fight in Ireland, that's an X factor. But I think this is a Vegas fight. So you got to start focusing on you got the Cinco de Mayo weekend, which is traditionally a boxing weekend. But if UFC wanted to take on the boxing establishment with a big card, something with a McGregor thing, and an ESPN outlet, McGregor and Cerrone and stuff, they could do it and, go up against just about anybody on any of the other formats and match them, sale for sale. So you might see it May 5th. You might see it July 4th. July 4th weekend, UFC's basically reserved for the last few years. They do like I'm going to call it a seminar. It's not a seminar. It's like like a convention, basically, where, people set up booths and things like that. And it's a big deal. And it's much bigger than just a weekend. They sponsor grappling tournaments and things like that as well on weekends like that in the past. So it's a big weekend, and they look for big fights, traditionally John Jones and that type of stuff. McGregor and Cerrone could supplant on any of those, and those would be two potential dates in the next 6 months that you get the fight.
Well, I don't know. I sure think that we've got something brewing here, and I hope we get a fight out of it. What that winds up being, I don't know. Conor starts to be, just when you think he's kind of stepped to the sidelines, boom, he's right back in the headlines again. And, he's that guy. He just knows how to do that. And he's better at it than anybody in the UFC has ever been. And for that, man, you've got to take your hat off to the guy. He's just really, really good at what he does, which is making himself known all the time. Look, we're at 21 minutes, and we probably ought to wrap this one up. Anything you guys want to say? Devin, anything before we take it out of here?
No, the only thing I would say is I would encourage anybody who watches this that does not have an ESPN account, that it is something I tell a lot of, my personal buddies and stuff that watch the fights, is if you want to be even more into the upcoming fights, you got to know the fighters. Get yourself an ESPN account. Get yourself the Fight Pass account if you can afford it. Watch these cards as they come, because they're developing the new talent. These undercard fights, we briefly went over it before we talked about Cerrone. There's some good talent out there. There's so much talent in the UFC right now, and it's grooming for future fights. And knowing these fighters makes you more excited for the upcoming fights. And I would just encourage people to go back and rewatch these cards, maybe a fight a day, or just watch these fights. That's all I would have to say.
It's a no-brainer. I mean, the bottom line is there 13 fights on a UFC card, and if you're a sports fan, you'd be hard pressed to watch every single football game. You might be able to squeeze them in through the, but sustain to watch every single game is kind of crazy, right? Baseball, even harder. In MMA, especially if you limit yourself to just UFC, you still have a shot at seeing every single fight. And that's something that the sport's still in its nascent stages. If they do what they plan with the UFC Mexico, or UFC England and stuff, you won't be able to see every single fight. So, you should take advantage of it when you get a chance. I really encourage it.
Agreed. Listen, guys, great show today. We were talking about the undercard for 143. It looks like ESPN and the UFC are here to stay. They have mated, and I don't think that's going anywhere, because they did some really big numbers, and people were really happy with what happened, even though a lot of people weren't happy with the outcome of the final fight. They were happy with the numbers, and I'm sure ESPN's jumping up and down, and the UFC is super-duper happy about the money that they just made. So, follow the money, and you know where everything else goes from there, which means McGregor is going to fight somebody pretty soon, because they need to get his ass back out there in the octagon so they can get him some fisticuff time. So we don't know where this goes for sure, but it sounds like the commentators and the analysts are telling us that it's going to happen in the next 6 months, and I'd love to see it happen in the next 3. Until next time, smash that subscribe button, comment, like us, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't. We've got a super new cool logo coming out very, very soon. The whole platform of the show is going to change, and things are going to look differently very, very soon. Everybody's going to be green screen, and we're going to do all that super nice stuff that everybody's been asking us about. So we appreciate everything. If you like what we do, tell somebody else. If you don't, tell us. Please share everything you got. Look, Miguel's got the green screen. It's getting ready to happen, man. Devin is our on-the-road correspondent now. He's like our chopper guy, the whirlybird guy, but he's in a semi. So we know what's going on everywhere. You can't touch us now. We got the South covered. We've got the roads covered. We've got Bloomington, Indiana covered. And I've got my studio covered, which is pretty important stuff if you want to know the truth. Hey, and we're still looking for one more analyst. If you're a female fight analyst out there and you know fights and you know them well, boxing and MMA, give me a call. Drop me a line. Until next time, namaste.